The wind carried dust and the smell of failure. Rhett Calder stood on the station platform with his hat pulled low, arms crossed, jaw set, like he was waiting for bad news. Which, in fairness, he was. The stagecoach was late, typical for a town like Brecon Falls, where nothing arrived on time except trouble. Around him, the usual crowd had gathered, shopkeepers pretending to sweep their storefronts, ranch hands lingering near the saloon, Mrs. Halloway from the boarding house clutching her shawl like it was armor. They weren't there for the mail. They were there for him. Word had spread fast. Rhett Calder, the man who'd rather face down a rattlesnake than hold a conversation, had sent for a mail-order bride. The whole town thought it was a joke, or pity, or desperation. Maybe all three. He didn't care what they thought. He never had. The truth was simpler and uglier than gossip. His ranch was dying, his debts were stacking higher than hay bales, and he needed help he couldn't afford to hire. A wife, quiet, practical, invisible, made sense. No expectations, no complications. Just someone to cook, clean, keep the house standing while he kept the land from collapsing entirely. He'd written the letter himself, blunt and businesslike. Seeking a woman of modest means and appearance, no romantic inclinations required, work ethic essential. He'd been careful with his words. Modest, plain, safe. The stagecoach rattled into view, dust billowing behind it like a slow-motion storm. Rhett straightened. His chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with anticipation and everything to do with dread. This was a transaction, nothing more. He reminded himself of that as the coach jerked to a halt, as the driver climbed down and opened the door with a theatrical flourish Rhett found deeply irritating. "Delivery for Calder," the driver announced, grinning like he'd just brought Christmas. Rhett stepped forward, and then she stepped out. Time didn't stop. It stumbled. Alara Vance was not plain. She was not modest. She stood in the doorway of that dust-choked stagecoach like she owned it, one gloved hand braced against the frame, the other holding a worn leather travel bag. Tall, taller than most women Rhett had seen, nearly his own height, with dark hair pulled back in a severe knot that somehow made her face sharper, more striking. Her eyes swept the crowd with the kind of cold assessment usually reserved for cattle auctions. She didn't smile, didn't flinch under the weight of 100 stares. She looked directly at Rhett. "You called her?" Her voice was low, clear, and carried an edge that suggested she already knew the answer and wasn't impressed. Rhett's throat went dry. "Yeah." "Good." She stepped down without waiting for help, boots hitting the dirt with a solid thud. She was dressed simply, dark traveling dress, no frills, no lace, but there was nothing simple about the way she moved. Confident, unbothered, like she'd walked into hostile territory before and lived to tell about it. Behind him, someone snickered. Rhett didn't turn around. "You're late," he said, because he didn't know what else to say. Alara raised an eyebrow. "Stage was delayed in Prescott. Broken axle. You want an apology or you want to get moving?" Mrs. Halloway gasped softly. A few of the ranch hands exchanged glances. Nobody talked to Rhett Calder like that. Not anymore. Not since he'd come back from the war with a limp, a scar, and a silence that kept people at a healthy distance. Rhett stared at her. She stared back. "You got other bags?" he asked finally. "Just this." She hefted the travel bag slightly. "Didn't see the point in bringing what I couldn't carry." "Fine, wagon's over there." He turned and walked, not checking to see if she followed. She did. He could hear her boots crunching gravel behind him, steady and sure. The crowd parted like water. He climbed into the wagon seat and she swung herself up beside him without asking for a hand. Rhett snapped the reins and the horses lurched forward. The ride out of town was silent. Brecon Falls fell away behind them, weathered storefronts, crooked fences, the skeletal frame of a half-built church that had been half-built for 5 years. The road stretched ahead, winding through scrubland dotted with juniper and sage. The sun was high and merciless. Rhett kept his eyes on the horizon. Alara finally spoke. "You always this talkative?" Wasn't aware conversation was part of the arrangement. "It's not. Just wondering if you're rude or just poor at people." Rhett's hands tightened on the reins. "Little of both." She almost smiled. Almost. "Fair enough." Silence returned. but it felt different now, less empty, more like a standoff. The ranch appeared in the distance, or what was left of it. The house was a squat, weathered structure with peeling paint and a roof that sagged on one side like a broken promise. The barn listed to the left, its doors hanging crooked. Fences were down in a dozen places, wire tangled and useless. The land itself stretched wide and wild, beautiful in the way abandoned things sometimes are, but it was clear no one had cared for it in a long time. Alara didn't say anything. She just looked. Rhett pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down. This is it. She stayed seated, surveying the wreckage. How long's it been like this? Long enough. You run it alone? Mostly. Hired hands? Can't afford them. She nodded slowly like she was calculating something in her head. Then she climbed down, grabbed her bag, and walked toward the house. Rhett followed. Inside wasn't much better. The main room was dim, dust motes floating in the shafts of light that slipped through gaps in the curtains. The furniture was sparse, table, chairs, a sagging couch near a cold fireplace. The kitchen was functional, but grim. Everything smelled faintly of old smoke and neglect. Alara set her bag down and turned to face him. Where do I sleep? Upstairs, second door on the right. And you? Downstairs, back room. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Relief? Disappointment? Rhett couldn't tell and didn't want to guess. We need to talk terms, she said. Rhett crossed his arms. I thought the letter covered it. The letter covered what you wanted, not what I agreed to. You got on the stagecoach. Because I had no better options. That doesn't mean I'm signing my life away without conditions. Rhett exhaled hard through his nose. Fine. Talk. Alara walked to the table and sat down, folding her hands in front of her like she was preparing to negotiate a business deal, which Rhett supposed she was. I'll cook, clean, and help with the ranch work, she said. But I'm not your servant, I'm not your property, and I'm not interested in pretending this is anything other than what it is. A practical arrangement between two people who need something from each other. Agreed. I want 1 month. Rhett frowned. 1 month for what? To prove I belong here. If at the end of 30 days you think this isn't working, I'll leave. No arguments. But if I stay, we renegotiate. Equal partnership, not employer and employee. Rhett stared at her. You're serious. Dead serious. He should have said no. Should have told her the deal was already made, take it or leave it. But something in her voice, steady, unflinching, utterly without fear, made him pause. You won't last a week, he said. Alara smiled then, sharp and cold. Then you've got nothing to worry about, do you? Rhett didn't answer. He turned and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. Tap. The first 3 days were a war neither of them acknowledged. Alara moved through the house like a storm, rearranging, scrubbing, throwing out things Rhett hadn't realized were broken until she piled them in the yard. She didn't ask permission, didn't consult him, just acted. By the second morning, the kitchen was gleaming, the main room smelled like lye soap instead of dust, and Rhett's coffee tasted better than it had in months. He hated that he noticed. Outside, she was worse. She repaired the front fence using wire and sheer stubbornness, her hands blistering as she twisted metal into place. When Rhett told her she was doing it wrong, she ignored him and kept working. When he physically stepped in to show her the right way, she watched once, nodded, and then did it her way anyway. You're impossible, he muttered. You're welcome, she replied. On the 4th day, Rhett found her in the barn, hauling feed sacks that weighed nearly as much as she did. Her face was flushed, sweat soaking through her dress, but she didn't stop, didn't complain. You're going to hurt yourself, he said. Already did. Doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't. She dropped the sack and turned to face him, breathing hard. You want me gone? Say it. Otherwise, stop hovering and let me work. I'm not hovering. You've been standing there for 5 minutes. Rhett opened his mouth, then closed it. He turned and walked out, unsure whether he was angry or impressed. That night, Alara cooked stew, thick, hearty, the kind that stuck to your ribs and reminded you food was supposed to taste like something. Rhett sat across from her at the table, eating in silence. She did the same. Finally, she spoke. You owe money. Rhett's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. What? The stack of letters on the desk in the back room. I wasn't snooping. Well, I was, but only because you clearly weren't dealing with them. You're 3 months behind on the land tax. The bank's threatening foreclosure. And someone named Crow keeps sending demands to buy you out. Rhett set the spoon down slowly. That's none of your business. It is if I'm living here. You've been here 4 days. And in 4 days, I've done more to keep this place standing than you have in months. Rhett's jaw clenched. You don't know anything about me. I know you're drowning, Elara said quietly. I know you're too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to admit you need it. And I know if you keep pretending those letters don't exist, you're going to lose everything. Rhett stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Stay out of it. He left the table, left the house, and walked out into the cold night air. His chest felt tight, his hands shaking with something he couldn't name. Anger, shame, fear. Maybe all of it. Behind him, the door opened. Elara stepped out, arms crossed against the chill. I'm not trying to fight you, she said. I'm trying to help. I didn't ask for help. No, you asked for a wife. You got a partner, whether you like it or not. Rhett turned to face her. The moonlight caught her features, hard and soft all at once. She wasn't backing down. She never backed down. Why do you care? He asked, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. Elara met his eyes. Because I've got nowhere else to go. And because you're not the only one who's lost everything. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and true. Rhett looked away first. 1 month, he said quietly. 1 month, she agreed. The trouble started on day 7. Rhett was fixing the barn door when he saw the riders coming. 3 men on horseback, moving slow and deliberate. He recognized the lead rider immediately, Silas Crow. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in a tailored coat that had no business being on a ranch. Crow owned half the county and wanted the other half. He'd been circling Rhett's land for years, waiting for it to fail. Rhett wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped into the yard. Crow reined his horse to a stop and smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Calder, heard you took a wife. Congratulations. What do you want, Crow? Just being neighborly? Thought I'd check in, see how you're managing. His gaze drifted to the house, the sagging barn, the broken fences. Looks like you're holding on. Barely. I'm fine. Are you? Crow leaned forward in his saddle. Because I'm hearing different. Hearing the bank's about ready to pull the rug out from under you. Hearing you're 1 bad season away from losing it all. Then you're hearing wrong. Crow's smile widened. I'm offering you a way out, Rhett. Sell me the land. I'll pay fair price, more than fair considering the state of things. You walk away clean, start fresh somewhere else. Not interested. Think about it. You're a proud man, I respect that. But pride doesn't pay debts. Rhett took a step closer. I said no. Crow's smile finally faded. You're making a mistake. Won't be my first. The 2 men stared at each other, the silence thick and dangerous. Finally, Crow straightened, pulling his reins. Offer stands, for now. He turned his horse and rode off, his men following. Rhett watched until they disappeared over the ridge, his pulse hammering in his ears. When he turned back toward the house, Elara was standing in the doorway. Who was that? She asked. Nobody. He didn't look like nobody. Rhett walked past her into the house. Drop it. But Elara didn't drop it. She never dropped anything. That night, she brought it up again. The man on the horse, Crow. He's the one sending the letters, isn't he? Rhett didn't answer. He wants this land. Everyone wants this land, doesn't mean they're getting it. What if he doesn't take no for an answer? Rhett looked at her across the dim room. Then he'll learn the hard way. Elara studied him for a long moment. You can't fight him alone. I've been fighting alone for years. And look where it's gotten you. The words stung because they were true. Rhett turned away, staring into the cold fireplace. Elara stepped closer. Let me help. You can't. You don't know that. I know you've been here a week. I know you don't understand what you're up against. Then explain it to me. Rhett's hands curled into fists. Crow doesn't just want the land. He wants to own everything, the water rights, the grazing routes, the whole valley. He's been buying up failing ranches for years, squeezing people out, forcing sales. Anyone who refuses, things happen. Fires, accidents, debts get called in early. He's got the law in his pocket, half the town scared to death of him, and enough money to make problems disappear. Alara listened without interrupting. I'm the last holdout, Rhett continued. The last piece he needs, and he's not going to stop until he gets it, or I'm buried trying to keep it. So what's your plan? Alara asked. Rhett laughed bitterly. Survive. Hope. Pray something breaks my way for once. That's not a plan. That's surrender with extra steps. Rhett turned to face her, anger flashing in his eyes. Then what would you do? Alara didn't flinch. I'd fight. With what? We've got no money, no help, no leverage. We've got this land, we've got each other, and we've got something Crow doesn't. What's that? Nothing to lose. Rhett stared at her. She was serious. Completely, recklessly serious. You're insane, he said. Maybe, but I'm not wrong. The next 2 weeks changed everything. Alara threw herself into the ranch with a ferocity Rhett had never seen. She mapped every fence line, cataloged every resource, inventoried supplies they didn't even know they had. She haggled with merchants in town, trading work for materials, convincing people to extend credit based on nothing but sheer force of will. She was relentless, exhausting, and impossibly effective. Rhett found himself working alongside her more and more. At first, it was reluctant. She needed help moving beams, fixing the well, hauling stone for the foundation she insisted they reinforce. But somewhere along the way, reluctance became routine. Routine became rhythm. They stopped arguing about how things should be done and just did them. One afternoon, they were working on the north fence when Rhett realized he was laughing. Actually laughing. Alara had made some sharp comment about his knot-tying skills, and before he could stop himself, the sound escaped, rough, unfamiliar, but real. Alara paused, hammer in hand, and looked at him. Did you just laugh? Rhett cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. No. You did. I heard it. You heard wrong. She grinned, an actual genuine grin that lit up her face in a way that made Rhett's chest feel strange. You're a terrible liar, Calder. Yeah, well, don't get used to it. But something had shifted. Some wall he'd built had cracked, just slightly. That night, they sat on the porch after dinner, exhausted and filthy. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. Rhett leaned back against the railing, watching the light fade. Why'd you really come here? He asked quietly. Alara was silent for a long moment. I told you, I had nowhere else to go. That's not the whole truth. She glanced at him, then away. No, it's not. Rhett waited. Finally, Alara spoke. I was married before, back east. He was charming, successful, everything a woman was supposed to want. Turned out he was also a liar, a cheat, and a coward. When his business collapsed, he disappeared, left me with nothing. No money, no home, no family, willing to take me in because I'd disgraced them by choosing wrong. Her voice was steady, but Rhett could hear the weight beneath it. I survived, she continued, worked whatever jobs I could find, cleaned houses, mended clothes, anything to keep moving, but every door I knocked on eventually slammed shut. So when I saw your letter, blunt, honest, asking for nothing but work, I thought maybe this was a door that wouldn't close. Rhett absorbed this, the pieces of her story settling into place. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not. She turned to look at him fully. I don't want pity. I want a chance. That's all I've ever wanted. Rhett nodded slowly. You've earned it. Alara's expression softened. You think so? Yeah, I do. They sat in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt like understanding. On day 23, everything went to hell. Rhett woke to the smell of smoke. He was on his feet before his brain fully caught up, stumbling out of his room and into the main house. Alara was already up, standing at the window, her face pale. The barn, she said. Rhett ran. The barn was engulfed, flames licking up the sides, black smoke pouring into the pre-dawn sky. Rhett grabbed buckets, Alara right behind him, and they fought the fire with everything they had: water from the well, dirt, blankets soaked and thrown over burning wood. It was hopeless. By the time the sun rose, the barn was gone, just a blackened skeleton and ash. Rhett stood in the wreckage, chest heaving, hands blistered and raw. Alara stood beside him, soot-streaked and exhausted. "This wasn't an accident," she said quietly. Rhett knew she was right. They found the evidence an hour later: boot prints leading away from the barn, a broken lantern deliberately placed near the hay. Someone had set the fire. Crow! Rhett's rage was cold and sharp. He saddled his horse, intent on riding straight to Crow's estate and dragging the man into the light. Alara grabbed the reins. "Don't!" she said. "Get out of my way!" "Listen to me. If you go there angry, you'll do something stupid. He'll use it against you. Have you arrested, or worse?" "I don't care." "I do." Alara's voice cracked, just slightly. "We can't afford to lose you. I can't afford to lose you." Rhett stopped, looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were fierce and afraid all at once. "Then what do we do?" he asked, and his voice sounded broken. Alara took a breath. "We fight smart. We gather proof. We make sure when we hit back, it lands." Rhett wanted to argue, wanted to rage, but the way she was looking at him, steady, unwavering, refusing to let him fall apart, anchored him. "Okay," he said finally. "We do it your way." Alara nodded. Then, before he could react, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Rhett froze. He couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him. Couldn't remember the last time he'd let anyone close enough to try. But Alara held on, and slowly, carefully, he let himself hold her back. "We're going to survive this," she whispered against his shoulder. Rhett closed his eyes. "Yeah, we are." And for the first time since the war, since the betrayal, since the long years of silence and distance, he believed it. The ashes were still warm when they started rebuilding. Not the barn. There wasn't money or time for that yet. But something else. Something harder to name. Rhett worked through the next days like a man possessed, repairing what could be saved, hauling away what couldn't. Alara matched him hour for hour, her hands raw and bleeding by sunset, her face set in grim determination. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The work said everything. On the third day after the fire, Rhett rode into town. Brecon Falls greeted him with the usual mix of pity and curiosity. Shopkeepers nodded. Women whispered behind their hands. The blacksmith, a burly man named Gus with arms like tree trunks, looked up from his anvil as Rhett approached. "Heard about the barn," Gus said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Damn shame." "Yeah." "You need metal work. I can float you for a bit. Pay when you can." Rhett blinked, surprised. "You sure?" Gus shrugged. "Your wife came by last week. Haggled me down to nothing on those fence posts, but she was fair about it. Respected that. Figure I owe you one. Appreciate it." Gus went back to hammering, and Rhett moved on, unsettled by the kindness. He wasn't used to kindness, didn't know what to do with it. He stopped at the general store next, needing supplies, nails, rope, anything he could carry. The owner, a thin, nervous man named Pritchard, glanced up from his ledger and immediately looked away. Calder. "Need to put some things on credit." Pritchard shifted uncomfortably. "Can't do that." Rhett frowned. "I've bought here for years." "I know, but..." "Orders." "Whose orders?" Pritchard wouldn't meet his eyes. "Just can't help you, sorry." Rhett felt the anger rising, hot and sharp, but he forced it down. "Crow got to you." Pritchard said nothing, which was answer enough. Rhett turned and walked out, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He made 3 more stops. Same story every time. Doors that had been open were suddenly closed. People who'd been willing to deal were suddenly unavailable. Crow was tightening the noose, cutting off supplies, isolating them. By the time Rhett returned to the ranch, the sun was setting and his mood was black as tar. Alara was in the yard, mending a saddle by lamplight. She looked up as he dismounted, reading his face immediately. "Bad day?" "He's squeezing us out. No one in town will sell to us on credit. They're all too scared of Crow." Alara set the saddle aside and stood. Then we go around them. There is no around. Brecon Falls is the only town for 50 miles. So we don't go to town. She crossed her arms, thinking. We find people who aren't afraid of Crow, ranchers, homesteaders, anyone operating outside his influence. Those people don't exist. They do. They're just harder to find. Alara's eyes sharpened. There's always someone who doesn't bend. We find them. Rhett wanted to argue, but he was too tired, and maybe, just maybe, she was right. Fine, he said. We try it your way. Alara smiled faintly. That's becoming a habit. Don't get cocky. Wouldn't dream of it. That night, they sat at the kitchen table with a hand-drawn map spread between them. Alara had marked every property within riding distance, noting which ones Crow owned, which ones had sold recently, which ones were still independent. The list of independents was depressingly short. Here, Alara pointed to a spot northwest of their land. The Brennan family, small operation, been there 30 years. Crow tried to buy them out twice. They refused both times. Brennans are stubborn, Rhett agreed, but they've got no reason to help us. Then we give them one. Like what? Alara leaned back, tapping her fingers on the table. Alliance, strength in numbers. If Crow's squeezing us, he's probably squeezing them too. We offer to share resources, watch each other's backs, make it harder for him to pick us off one by one. Rhett studied her. You've thought about this. I've had time. You really think it'll work? I think doing nothing guarantees we lose. This gives us a chance. Rhett exhaled slowly. All right, we ride out tomorrow. Alara nodded, then hesitated. There's something else. What? She pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket and slid it across the table. Found this tucked under the door this morning. Didn't want to show you until you'd cooled down. Rhett unfolded it. The message was short, printed in block letters. Last warning, sell or suffer. His hands tightened on the paper, crumpling the edges. Rhett, I'm fine. You're not. He looked up at her, his eyes hard. What do you want me to say? That I'm scared? That I don't know if we can win this? I want you to say you're not doing this alone anymore. The words hit him harder than he expected. Rhett set the paper down and rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. I'm not used to this, he said quietly. Used to what? Someone giving a damn. Alara's expression softened. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her palm was rough, scarred from work, warm. Get used to it, she said. Rhett looked at their hands, then at her face. Something shifted in his chest, a loosening, a crack in the wall he'd built so carefully. He didn't pull away. Yeah, he said. All right. They sat like that for a long moment, the lamplight flickering between them, the silence full of things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Alara pulled her hand back and stood. I'll make coffee. We've got planning to do. Rhett watched her move to the stove, efficient and sure, and realized with a jolt that he didn't want to imagine this place without her anymore. The thought terrified him. The Brennan Ranch sat in a shallow valley surrounded by red rock and scrub pine. It was small but well kept, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and stubbornness in equal measure. Rhett and Alara rode up just after noon, the sun brutal overhead. A man emerged from the barn, tall, weathered, with a gray beard and suspicious eyes. Thomas Brennan. Rhett had dealt with him a handful of times over the years. Fair man, tough as nails. Calder, Brennan said, not quite friendly. Wasn't expecting company. Rhett dismounted. Need to talk. Brennan's gaze shifted to Alara, curiosity flickering across his face. This the wife everyone's gossiping about? Alara Vance, she said, dismounting and extending a hand. Pleasure? Brennan shook it, surprised. Thomas Brennan. You always this forward? Only when I need to be. Brennan almost smiled. Fair enough. Come inside. Sun'll kill you out here. They followed him into the house. Simple, clean, smelling faintly of coffee and leather. Brennan's wife, a sturdy woman named Margaret with kind eyes and flour on her apron, offered them water and biscuits. They sat around a worn wooden table. So, Brennan said, leaning back in his chair. What's this about? Rhett got straight to it. Crow burned my barn. He's cutting off my supply lines in town, threatening me to sell. I figure if he's doing it to me, he's doing it to you. Brennan's expression darkened. He's tried. Sent his boys around a few weeks back. Offered me twice what this land's worth. I told him where he could shove his offer. And since then? Fences cut, water trough poisoned, lost 3 head of cattle last week, found them shot in the north pasture. Margaret's face tightened, but she said nothing. Rhett nodded grimly. He's escalating. What are you proposing? Brennan asked. Alara leaned forward. We work together. Share resources, information, manpower when needed. If he hits one of us, we both respond. Make it too costly for him to keep pushing. Brennan studied her. You think that'll stop him? No, Alara said bluntly. But it'll slow him down. Give us time to find another way. What other way? We're working on that part. Brennan laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You're asking me to bet my land on a plan you don't have yet. I'm asking you to bet your land on us instead of hoping Crow gets bored, Alara shot back. How's that working out so far? Brennan's eyes narrowed, but there was respect in them now. He glanced at his wife. Margaret gave a small nod. All right, Brennan said. We're in. But if this goes sideways, it won't, Alara said. You can't promise that. No. But I can promise we'll fight like hell. Brennan extended his hand across the table. Rhett shook it, then Alara did the same. Welcome to the losing side, Brennan said dryly. We'll see about that, Alara replied. They left an hour later with an agreement in place and 2 more names. Other ranchers Brennan thought might join them. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had that morning. On the ride home, Rhett glanced at Alara. You're good at this. At what? Convincing people to do dangerous things. She smiled slightly. It's a gift. Or a curse. Maybe both. They rode in comfortable silence after that, the landscape rolling past in shades of gold and rust. Rhett found himself watching her more than the road, the way she sat easy in the saddle, the way the wind pulled at her hair, the way she looked at the horizon like she was daring it to get in her way. What? She asked, catching him staring. Nothing. Liar. Rhett looked away, heat creeping up his neck. Just thinking. About? About how you're not what I expected. Alara was quiet for a moment. Disappointed? No. The word came out rougher than he intended. Opposite. She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with words. Rhett's chest tightened. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she'd shaken everything loose inside him, that he was terrified and grateful in equal measure. But the words stuck in his throat. We should pick up the pace, he said instead. Storm's coming. Alara followed his gaze to the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Yeah, let's move. They spurred their horses forward, racing the weather home. The storm hit just as they reached the ranch, rain lashing down in sheets, thunder cracking overhead like the sky was breaking apart. They got the horses into the makeshift shelter. The barn was gone, but they'd rigged a lean-to that would have to do, and then ran for the house, soaked to the bone by the time they stumbled through the door. Rhett shook water from his hair, breathing hard. Alara stood beside him, dripping, laughing breathlessly. That was close, she said. Too close. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white. Thunder followed immediately, rattling the windows. The storm was directly overhead. Alara shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Rhett grabbed a blanket from the couch and handed it to her. Get dry. I'll start a fire. I can help. Just sit. For once. She didn't argue, which told him she was more exhausted than she let on. Rhett built the fire quickly, coaxing flames from kindling and logs until warmth began to fill the room. He turned to find Alara watching him, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her hair loose and damp. What? He asked. You're different than you were a month ago. Yeah? Yeah. She tilted her head. Less closed off. Rhett didn't know how to respond to that, so he sat down across from her, close to the fire. The storm raged outside, but inside it felt almost peaceful. Can I ask you something? Alara said. Depends. What happened? Before? The thing that made you... This. Rhett stiffened. That's not a small question. I know, you don't have to answer. But maybe he did. Maybe it was time. He stared into the fire, the words coming slow and painful. I was engaged once. Before the war. Her name was Caroline. We were supposed to get married when I got back. I believed that. Believed in her, in us, in the idea that I had something to come home to. He paused, jaw tight. I got wounded. Took a bullet in the leg, nearly died from infection. By the time I made it back, 2 years had passed. Caroline was married to someone else, a banker from back east. Rich, safe, everything I wasn't. She didn't even have the decency to look sorry when she told me. Said she'd waited long enough. Said I was different now, too hard, too broken. Alara said nothing, just listened. I came here, Rhett continued, bought this land with what little I had left. Figured I'd build something, prove I wasn't broken. But then the debts piled up, the ranch started failing, and I realized she was right. I was broken, still am. No, Alara said quietly. You're not. Rhett looked at her. How do you know? Because broken things don't fight back, and you're still fighting. The simplicity of it hit him hard. Rhett felt something crack open inside him, something he'd kept locked down for years. Why'd you stay? He asked, his voice rough. After the fire, after everything, why didn't you leave? Alara met his eyes. Because I'm tired of running, and because you're the first person in a long time who didn't expect me to be someone I'm not. Rhett swallowed hard. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. Us. Whatever this is, Alara smiled softly. Me neither. We'll figure it out. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the storm began to ease, rain softening to a steady rhythm. Rhett stood and crossed the space between them, slow and deliberate. Alara looked up at him, her breath catching. He offered his hand. She took it. Dance with me, he said. There's no music. Don't need it. Alara stood, the blanket falling away. Rhett pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. They swayed together in the firelight, clumsy and uncertain, moving to a rhythm only they could hear. Alara rested her head against his chest. Rhett closed his eyes, breathing her in, smoke and rain and something indefinably her. This is crazy, she whispered. Yeah, we're going to lose everything. Maybe. And you're still here. So are you. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were bright, fierce, full of something that made his heart stutter. Rhett. He kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't smooth. Just a desperate, clumsy collision of mouths that tasted like rain and hope and fear all tangled together. Alara made a small sound of surprise, then kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rhett pressed his forehead to hers. I'm not good at this, he said. I don't care. I'm going to mess it up. Probably. Alara shut up and kiss me again. So he did. The next morning brought clarity and consequences in equal measure. Rhett woke with Alara curled against his side, her hair spilled across his chest, her breathing slow and even. He lay still, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile thing had formed between them in the night. But reality didn't wait. Alara stirred, blinking awake. For a moment she looked confused, then memory returned. She didn't pull away. Morning, Rhett said. Morning. They lay there, neither quite sure what came next. Finally, Alara sat up, pushing hair from her face. We should talk about this. Yeah. But not right now. Agreed. She smiled slightly. Good, because we've got bigger problems. She was right. They dressed quickly, ate a hurried breakfast, and got back to work. There was too much to do, too much at stake to get lost in feelings neither of them knew how to name. But something had changed. The way Rhett's hand lingered on her shoulder when he passed. The way Alara smiled at him across the yard. Small things. Dangerous things. 2 days later, the second blow landed. They were working the south fence when they heard hoofbeats. 6 riders this time, not 3. Crow wasn't among them, but Rhett recognized the lead man, Dalton, Crow's enforcer. Big, mean, with a reputation for violence. Rhett straightened, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle leaning against the fence post. Dalton reined in, grinning. "Calder, got a message from Mr. Crow." "Not interested." "You're going to want to hear this one." Dalton pulled a rolled paper from his coat and tossed it. It landed in the dirt at Rhett's feet. Rhett picked it up, unrolled it. Legal documents. A foreclosure notice, signed and sealed. "Bank's calling your loan," Dalton said. "You got 30 days to pay in full or vacate the property." Rhett's vision went red. "This is illegal. I've been making payments, missed the last 2. Terms say the bank can call the full amount due if payments lapse. You didn't read the fine print. That's on you." "Crow bought the debt," Alara said flatly, stepping up beside Rhett. Dalton's grin widened. "Smart girl. Mr. Crow owns your paper now, and he wants his money, or the land. Your choice." Rhett's hand tightened on the rifle. Dalton saw it and laughed. "Go ahead, Calder. Give me a reason. I got 5 witnesses here who'll swear you drew first." Alara's hand closed around Rhett's wrist, firm and grounding. "We'll handle it legally." "Good luck with that," Dalton said. He turned his horse. 30 days. Clock's ticking." They rode off, leaving dust and dread in their wake. Rhett stood frozen, the foreclosure notice crumpling in his fist. Alara gently took it from him, smoothing it out. "We fight this," she said. "How? He owns the bank. He owns the law. We can't "Yes, we can." Her voice was steel. "We find leverage. There's always leverage. Alara, this isn't something you can just will into working. Then what do you suggest? We give up? Walk away? Maybe that's the smart play." Alara grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. We are not giving up. Not now. Not ever. You hear me?" Rhett stared into her eyes, blazing, unbreakable, and felt something reignite inside him. "Yeah," he said hoarsely. "I hear you." "Good." She released him, already thinking, already planning. "We need information. Everything Crow's done, everyone he's hurt, every dirty deal he's made. Someone out there knows something we can use." "That could take weeks." "We don't have weeks." "Then we work fast." Rhett wanted to believe her, wanted to believe they had a chance, but the weight of years of failure pressed down on him, heavy and familiar. Alara saw it in his face. She stepped closer, her hand finding his. "Trust me," she said simply. And despite everything, despite the odds, despite the fear, Rhett did. "All right," he said. "Let's go to war." War, it turned out, required more than anger and determination. It required information, and information was a currency neither of them had in abundance. They started with Thomas Brennan, riding out to his ranch before dawn the next morning. Brennan met them at the door, still in his nightshirt, a rifle in his hands and suspicion on his face until he recognized them. "Little early for a social call," he said, lowering the weapon. "We need to talk," Rhett said, "about Crow." Brennan's expression hardened. "Come in." Inside, Margaret was already brewing coffee, her movements efficient despite the hour. They gathered around the kitchen table, the lamp casting long shadows across weathered faces. Rhett explained the foreclosure, the impossible 30-day deadline, the trap Crow had laid. Brennan listened without interrupting, his jaw getting tighter with every word. "Son of a bitch," he muttered when Rhett finished. "He's done this before." Alara leaned forward. "To who?" "The Hendersons about 2 years back. Same setup. Bought their debt from the bank, called it due, gave them no time to raise the money. They lost everything. Farm went to auction, Crow bought it for pennies on the dollar." "Where are the Hendersons now?" Alara asked. "Dead, both of them. House fire 6 months after they moved to town. Officials called it an accident, but everyone knew better." The room went cold. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she poured coffee, sloshing some onto the table. She wiped it up without comment. "Who else?" Rhett asked quietly. Brennan thought for a moment. "The Morrison Ranch, up north. The Galloway place out east. At least 5 operations I can think of, maybe more. All the same pattern. Debt bought, foreclosure threatened, property seized. Any of those families still around? Alara asked. A few. Morrison's widow lives above the seamstress shop in town. Galloway's son works at the livery. They don't talk about it much. Scared, I figure. Alara stood, already planning. We need to talk to them, get their stories, gather evidence. If we can prove Crow's been running this scheme for years. Who are you going to prove it to? Brennan interrupted. The sheriff's on Crow's payroll. The judge, too. Hell, half the county owes him money or favors. You think they're going to turn on him because you wave some testimonies around? We go higher then. Territorial authorities, federal marshals if we have to. You got proof of federal crimes? Alara hesitated. Not yet. Then you got nothing, and in 30 days you'll have less than that. Rhett felt the weight of it crushing down on him again. Brennan was right. They were fighting shadows with broken swords. But Alara wasn't finished. What about the land itself? The deeds, the transfers? If Crow's acquiring property through fraud, there has to be a paper trail. County records, registration documents, something. Brennan raised an eyebrow. And you want to break into the county office? I want to look at public records. That's not breaking in. That's being a concerned citizen. At 3 a.m? If that's what it takes. Margaret spoke up for the first time, her voice soft but certain. There's a clerk at the county office, Mary Dutton. Good woman, honest. Her husband died in the war, same regiment as Thomas. She might help, if you ask right. Brennan nodded slowly. Mary keeps her head down, but she's got a spine, worth a try. Alara looked at Rhett. We go today. And say what? Excuse me, we'd like to see evidence of massive land fraud, please? We say we're researching property boundaries for our ranch. Start there, see what she shows us, build trust. If she's honest, like Margaret says, she might point us in the right direction. It was thin, desperate, but it was something. All right, Rhett said, we try it. They left Brennan's place an hour later with a list of names, families Crow had destroyed, people who might talk if pushed, threads they could pull. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The ride back was quiet. The sun climbed higher, turning the landscape harsh and bright. Rhett watched Alara from the corner of his eye, the way she sat straight back despite exhaustion, the way her mind was clearly racing ahead, calculating angles and possibilities. You ever been wrong about something? He asked. She glanced at him. Constantly. Could have fooled me. I'm good at hiding it. She paused. Why? Just wondering if you've considered that this might not work, that we might actually lose. Of course I've considered it. And I decided I don't care. I'd rather go down fighting than surrender without trying. Rhett absorbed that. You know you're insane, right? You've mentioned it. Just making sure you're aware. Alara smiled, quick and sharp. I married a stranger and moved to a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. I was aware the moment I got on that stagecoach. Fair point. They rode on, and despite everything, despite the impossible odds and the ticking clock, Rhett felt something like hope stirring in his chest. The county office was a squat brick building on the edge of town, official and unwelcoming. They arrived mid-afternoon, the heat brutal, the streets mostly empty. Rhett tied the horses while Alara straightened her dress and tucked stray hair behind her ears, composing herself into something approximating respectable. Inside, the office was dim and cool, smelling of old paper and ink. A woman sat behind a tall desk, middle-aged, plain-faced, with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers. She looked up as they entered. Help you? Mary Dutton? Alara asked. That's me? My name is Alara Calder. This is my husband, Rhett. We own the ranch north of Brecon Falls. We're trying to verify some property boundaries, and we're hoping to review the land records. Mary studied them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Which parcels? Our own primarily, but we'd also like to understand the neighboring properties, make sure there are no disputes waiting to happen. It was a reasonable request, delivered in a reasonable tone. Mary seemed to weigh it, then nodded slowly. Records are public. You're entitled to see them, but I close at 5, so you've got about 2 hours. That's plenty. Thank you. Mary stood and led them to a back room lined with shelves of ledgers and deed books. She pulled down several volumes and set them on a scarred wooden table. Your property should be in this one. she said, tapping a thick leather-bound book. Neighboring parcels are in these. You need help reading the legal descriptions. Let me know. We appreciate it, Alara said. Mary lingered for a moment, something flickering in her eyes, caution or maybe curiosity. Then she turned and left, her footsteps echoing back to the front office. Rhett and Alara worked in silence, paging through deed after deed, cross-referencing dates and names. The records painted a picture, and the longer they looked, the uglier it got. Here, Alara whispered, pointing to an entry. The Henderson property, transferred to Crow 2 years ago for $800. Rhett checked the previous entry. Original purchase price was $3,000. He paid a quarter of what it was worth. And here, Morrison Ranch. Same thing. Acquired at auction, no other bidders listed. Because no one bids against Crow. They kept digging, finding pattern after pattern. Properties acquired for far less than market value. Transfers happening within days of foreclosure notices. Entire families wiped off the land registry like they'd never existed. But nothing explicitly illegal. Nothing that screamed fraud in a way that would hold up in court. Alara sat back, frustrated. It's all technically legal. Predatory, immoral, but legal. So what do we do? Before she could answer, Mary returned, carrying a tray with 2 cups of water. She set it down and glanced at the open ledgers. Finding what you need? She asked, her tone carefully neutral. Alara looked at her, weighing the risk. Then she made a choice. Not exactly. We're trying to understand how Silas Crow has acquired so much land in such a short time. Mary's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. That's not a boundary question. No, it's not. What's your interest? He's coming for our ranch next. We're trying to figure out how to stop him. Mary was silent for a long moment, the only sound the ticking of a clock on the wall. Finally, she pulled out a chair and sat down. You can't, she said quietly. No one can. People have tried. They all lost. Then help us be the first ones to win, Alara said. I could lose my job. Worse, probably. We're not asking you to break the law, just point us in the right direction. Mary's hands twisted in her lap. Why should I? Because it's the right thing to do, Rhett said, speaking for the first time. And because my wife's right, someone has to try. Mary looked at him, really looked, and whatever she saw there seemed to make up her mind. There's a discrepancy, she said softly. In the water rights registry, Crow claims water access to the North Valley through an old treaty provision, but the original treaty documents don't match the ones on file now. I noticed it 6 months ago when I was reorganizing the archives. The signatures are different. The dates don't line up. Alara went very still. You're saying the documents were forged. I'm saying they don't match. What you do with that information is your business. Where are the originals? There's a territorial archive in Prescott. They keep copies of all major land treaties. If the originals there don't match what's on file here, you've got your proof. That's 2 days' ride, Rhett said. At least, Mary agreed. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I never had this conversation. Understand? Understood, Alara said. Thank you. Mary nodded once, then walked back to the front office, her footsteps steady and sure. Rhett and Alara looked at each other across the table, the weight of what they'd just learned settling over them. 2 days there, 2 days back, Rhett said. That's 4 days out of 30 we don't have. So we ride fast. Alara, we have a lead, a real one. We can't ignore it. Rhett knew she was right, but the thought of leaving the ranch undefended made his skin crawl. Crow's men could do anything in 4 days. As if reading his mind, Alara said, We asked Brennan to watch the place. He owes us nothing, but he might do it anyway. And if he won't, then we go anyway and deal with whatever we come back to. Rhett wanted to argue, wanted to find a safer option, a smarter play, but there wasn't one. There never had been. All right, he said. We leave at first light. They made it back to the ranch just before sunset, the sky bleeding red and orange across the horizon. Rhett unhitched the horses while Alara went inside to pack supplies for the journey. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd learned to work together without speaking, each anticipating the other's needs. Rhett was hauling water to the trough when he noticed the silence. The wrong kind of silence. No birds, no insects, just stillness that felt like a held breath. He set the bucket down slowly and reached for the rifle he'd left leaning against the fence post. "Alara," he called, keeping his voice low. "Get inside." She appeared in his doorway, reading the tension in his posture immediately. "What is it?" "Don't know. Something's wrong." They didn't have to wait long to find out what. 3 riders materialized from the tree line to the east, moving slow and deliberate. Not Dalton this time. Younger men, rough-looking, the kind Crow hired when he wanted something done quietly and didn't care about the details. Rhett stepped into the open, rifle in hand. Alara moved to his side, and he wanted to tell her to stay inside, stay safe, but he knew she wouldn't listen. The riders stopped 20 feet away. The one in front, a lean man with a scar running down his cheek, grinned. "Calder, we got a message from Mr. Crow." "Already got his message. Not interested in hearing it again." "This one's different." Scar gestured to the man on his left, who pulled out a rolled paper and tossed it into the dirt. "New terms. Mr. Crow's feeling generous. He'll give you 48 hours to vacate. Take what you can carry. Walk away clean. No debt, no trouble." "And if we don't?" Scar's grin widened. "Then we make you." Rhett's finger tightened on the trigger. "You threatening me on my own land?" "Just delivering a message. What you do with it is your business." Scar tipped his hat mockingly. 48 hours, Calder, starting now." They turned and rode off, taking their time, making it clear they weren't afraid of anything Rhett might do. When they were gone, Alara picked up the paper and unrolled it. It was a contract, already signed by Crow, with blank spaces for their signatures. "He's not even pretending anymore," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "He's just taking it." Rhett stared at the horizon where the riders had disappeared, his mind racing. 48 hours, not 30 days. Crow was done waiting. "We leave tonight," Alara said. "What?" "For Prescott. We can't wait until morning. Every hour counts now." "Alara, it's almost dark." "Then we ride until we can't see and camp until dawn, but we leave tonight." Rhett wanted to protest, wanted to tell her it was reckless, dangerous, insane, but looking at her face, set, determined, absolutely unbreakable, he knew there was no point. "I'll saddle the horses," he said. They packed by lamplight, taking only what they could carry on horseback: bedrolls, food, water, ammunition. Rhett wrote a quick note for Brennan and nailed it to the door, hoping the man would find it before Crow's men came back. By the time they were ready to leave, full dark had fallen. The moon was a thin sliver, providing almost no light. Rhett helped Alara mount, then swung into his own saddle. "You sure about this?" he asked one last time. Alara looked back at the house, dark, silent, fragile in the moonlight. Then she looked at him. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They rode out, the horses picking their way carefully through the darkness, and behind them, the ranch fell away into shadow. The night ride was brutal. They followed the main road as long as they could, but when the clouds rolled in and swallowed even the meager moonlight, they had no choice but to stop. They made camp in a shallow ravine, no fire, just bedrolls laid out on hard ground. Rhett sat with his back against a rock, rifle across his lap, listening to every sound the darkness offered. Beside him, Alara huddled in her blanket, shivering despite the relatively mild night. "You should sleep," he said quietly. "Can't." "Try." "Rhett, if we don't find those documents, we will. But if we don't, then we figure something else out. We always do." Alara laughed softly, without humor. "You sound like me." "Yeah, well, you're a bad influence." She shifted closer, and Rhett found himself putting an arm around her, pulling her against his side. She fit there perfectly, her head resting on his shoulder, her breathing gradually slowing. "I'm scared," she whispered. It was the first time she'd admitted it out loud. Rhett tightened his hold on her. "Me too. What if I'm wrong? What if this is just another dead end, and I've dragged you on a wild chase for nothing? Then we tried. That's more than most people can say. That's not enough. It's all we've got." Alara was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. There's something I need to tell you. Rhett's chest tightened. What? I'm pregnant. The words hung in the darkness, massive and terrifying. Rhett couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His hand moved instinctively to her stomach, resting there, feeling nothing yet but knowing everything had changed. How long have you known? He managed. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I wasn't sure at first, but now I am. Why didn't you tell me? Because we had enough to deal with. Because I didn't want it to change anything. Because I'm terrified of what it means. Rhett pulled her closer, his mind reeling. A child. Their child. Growing inside her while they fought impossible battles and faced impossible odds. We're going to win this, he said, and his voice shook with something that wasn't quite conviction, but was close enough. We're going to win because we have to, because there's no other option anymore. Alara turned her face into his chest, and he felt her tears soaking through his shirt. I'm sorry, she said. I should have told you sooner. Don't be sorry. Just promise me something. What? Whatever happens, you protect yourself first, the baby first. If things go bad, you run. You don't look back, you don't wait for me, you just run. Rhett, promise me. No. Alara, no. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes fierce even in the darkness. We survive together or not at all. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. But Rhett wanted to argue, wanted to make her see reason, but he knew that fire in her eyes. Knew it wouldn't bend. You're impossible, he said roughly. So you keep telling me. He kissed her then, desperate and tender, trying to pour everything he couldn't say into that single moment. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Alara laid her head back on his shoulder. We should sleep, she said. Long ride tomorrow. Yeah, but neither of them slept much. They sat together in the darkness, holding each other, listening to the night, and waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, they were already moving. The road to Prescott stretched long and dusty ahead of them, and they pushed the horses hard, stopping only when absolutely necessary. By midday, the heat was suffocating. By evening, both riders and animals were exhausted. They made Prescott late on the second day, the town appearing like a mirage in the distance, larger than Brecon Falls, more established, with actual brick buildings and paved streets in places. The Territorial Archive was housed in the courthouse, an imposing structure that dominated the town square. They stabled the horses and found a cheap boarding house, paying for a single night. The room was small and stifling, but it had a bed, and that was luxury enough. They washed the trail dust off and changed into their least filthy clothes. Tomorrow morning, Alara said, sitting on the edge of the bed. We get the documents and head back. If they'll let us see them. They will. They're public records. Rhett sat beside her. And if they match, if there's no discrepancy, then we find another way. Alara, I'm not giving up. No matter what we find tomorrow, I'm not giving up. Rhett took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I know. They lay down together, fully clothed, too tired to do anything but hold each other. Rhett listened to Alara's breathing, even out as she fell asleep, and he found himself placing his hand on her stomach again, thinking about the impossible future they were fighting for. He didn't sleep, just watched over her and waited for morning. The courthouse opened at 8. They were there at 7:30, waiting on the steps like supplicants at a temple. When the clerk finally unlocked the doors, they were the first ones in. The archive room was in the basement, cool and dusty, lined with shelves of documents dating back decades. The clerk, an elderly man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, listened to their request with polite disinterest. Water rights treaty for the North Valley dated approximately 8 to 10 years ago, Alara repeated. We need to see the original. The clerk sighed. Do you have a specific document number? No, but it would be filed under land agreements for the Brecon Falls region. That could be dozens of documents. Then we'll look through dozens of documents. The clerk studied her for a moment, then shrugged. Your time to waste. Shelf 12, Section C, treaty documents are chronological. He pointed them in the right direction and shuffled back upstairs, leaving them alone. Rhett and Alara pulled down every relevant volume they could find, spreading them across a long table. They worked methodically, checking dates, reading provisions, comparing signatures. An hour passed. then 2. And then Alara went very still. Rhett! He looked up. She was holding 2 documents side by side, her hands shaking slightly. This is it, she said. The original treaty, and this, she pulled out a copy they'd taken from the county office in Brecon Falls, is what's on file back home. Rhett moved beside her, comparing the papers. The differences were subtle, but unmistakable. The signatures didn't match. The dates were off by 3 months, and the provision granting water rights present in the county copy was completely absent from the territorial original. It's a forgery, Rhett said quietly. It's a forgery, Alara confirmed, her voice rising with barely contained triumph. Crow forged the treaty to claim water rights he doesn't actually have, which means every land acquisition he's made based on controlling that water is built on fraud, which is a federal crime. They stared at each other, the weight of what they'd found sinking in. We need certified copies, Alara said. Official documents the court will recognize. They found the clerk and requested certified copies of both the original treaty and several supporting documents. The man grumbled about the extra work, but agreed, disappearing into a back room to prepare the paperwork. While they waited, Rhett and Alara stood in the courthouse lobby, neither quite able to believe their luck. We actually found it, Rhett said. We found it. Now what? Alara's expression hardened. Now we take this to someone who can't be bought. Someone outside Crow's reach. Who? Federal Marshal. There's an office in Tucson, 3 days' ride from here, maybe 4. We don't have 4 days. Then we make time. We send a telegram first, explain the situation, request an emergency meeting, get them moving toward us while we ride toward them. It was risky, it was desperate, but it was also the best option they had. The clerk returned with their certified documents, sealed and stamped. Rhett paid the fee, nearly the last of their cash, and they walked out of the courthouse into blazing afternoon sun. At the telegraph office, Alara composed a message while Rhett paced. The operator, a bored-looking young man, took the paper and counted words. Recipient? Federal Marshal's Office, Tucson. Marked urgent. The operator raised an eyebrow but sent the message without comment. The reply would take hours, maybe longer. They had lunch at a small cafe, the first real meal they'd had in days, and tried to plan their next move, but exhaustion was catching up with both of them, making it hard to think clearly. We should rest, Rhett said. A few hours at least, then we start back. Alara wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her with a jaw-cracking yawn. All right, a few hours. They returned to the boarding house and collapsed onto the bed. Rhett expected to lie awake, his mind churning, but sleep took him almost immediately. He woke to darkness and the sound of breaking glass. Rhett was moving before his eyes fully opened, muscle memory from the war taking over. He rolled off the bed, grabbing Alara and pulling her down with him as footsteps thundered up the stairs outside their door. Window, he hissed. Alara was already scrambling toward it, the certified documents clutched in her hand. Rhett grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the wall and moved to the door, pressing his back against the frame. The footsteps stopped. A pause. Then the door exploded inward, the cheap lock shattering under a boot heel. 2 men rushed in, not Crow's usual hired muscle. These were professionals, moving with military precision. Rhett brought the rifle up, but the first man was faster, knocking it aside and driving a fist into Rhett's ribs. Pain exploded through his chest. He staggered back, gasping. Rhett! Alara screamed. The second man lunged for her. She threw the wash basin at his head, buying herself a second to shove the documents into her dress pocket. The man cursed, wiping water from his eyes, then grabbed her arm. Rhett saw red. He drove his shoulder into the first man's gut, sending them both crashing into the wall. They grappled, trading blows in the cramped space. Rhett caught an elbow to the jaw that made his vision blur, but he didn't let go, didn't stop fighting. Across the room, Alara was holding her own remarkably well, using the second man's momentum against him, dodging and striking with a scrappiness that spoke of hard experience. But she was smaller, weaker, and pregnant. She couldn't keep it up forever. The first man got Rhett in a chokehold. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. He threw himself backward, slamming the man into the doorframe. The grip loosened. Rhett wrenched free, spun, and landed a punch that sent the man stumbling into the hallway. He turned to help Alara just as she brought a chair down on the second man's head. The wood splintered. The man dropped like a sack of grain. "Move!" Rhett grabbed her hand and they ran, bursting out of the room and down the stairs. Behind them, the first man was shouting, more footsteps joining his. They hit the street at a dead run. The horses were stabled 3 blocks away. Might as well have been 3 miles. "This way!" Alara pulled him into an alley, weaving through narrow passages between buildings. Rhett's lungs burned, his ribs screaming where he'd been hit, but he kept running. They emerged onto a side street. The stable was ahead, dark and blessedly quiet. They slipped inside, moving between nervous horses toward their own mounts. "Who were those men?" Alara panted, already working the buckles on her horse's stall. "Professionals. Crow sent professionals." Rhett saddled his horse with shaking hands. "He knows. Someone told him we were here. The telegraph operator, maybe, or the clerk. Doesn't matter, we need to move." They led the horses out through the back of the stable, mounting once they hit the alley. Rhett could hear shouting in the distance, getting closer. "Ride," he said. They kicked their horses into a gallop, racing through the dark streets of Prescott. Behind them, the shouting intensified. Gunshots cracked through the night air. Rhett heard a bullet whine past his ear. "Don't stop!" he yelled. Alara was leaning low over her horse's neck, urging it faster. They hit the edge of town and kept going, plunging into the desert darkness beyond. The road was barely visible, moonlight painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. They rode hard for an hour before Rhett finally risked slowing down. Both horses were lathered, breathing hard. Alara was pale, gripping the reins so tight her knuckles were white. "You all right?" Rhett asked. "Fine. You?" "Been worse." It was a lie. His ribs felt cracked, his jaw throbbed, and every breath hurt. But they were alive. They had the documents. That was what mattered. "We can't go back to Brecon Falls," Alara said. "They'll be watching the road." "I know. We loop south, come in from the east. It'll add a day." "We don't have a day." "We don't have a choice." Alara was quiet for a moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the documents, checking them in the dim light. They were crumpled but intact. "We need to get these to the marshal," she said. "Everything else is secondary. The ranch is already lost if we don't get these to someone with authority. Rhett, Crow's not playing games anymore. He sent killers, professional killers. We can't go home until we have protection." Rhett knew she was right, but the thought of abandoning the ranch, even temporarily, made him sick. Everything they'd fought for, left undefended. "Brennan's there," Alara said, reading his face. "He'll do what he can." "Against professionals? He doesn't stand a chance." "Neither do we. Not alone. But if we can get these documents to a federal marshal, if we can get the law actually moving, we have a shot." Rhett stared out at the dark landscape, weighing impossible choices. Finally, he nodded. "South first, then Tucson. We get the marshal moving, then we go home." "Together," Alara said. "Together." They rode on into the night, pushing the exhausted horses as much as they dared, stopping only when absolutely necessary. By dawn, they were miles off the main road, following game trails and dry creek beds that would make them harder to track. The sun rose brutal and unforgiving. They found a narrow canyon with shade and water, let the horses rest and drink. Rhett checked Alara over carefully, looking for injuries she might be hiding. "I'm fine," she insisted, but there were bruises blooming on her arms where the man had grabbed her. "You need to be more than fine. You need to be careful." "I know." "Do you?" "Because throwing yourself at armed men isn't careful." Alara's eyes flashed. "He was between me and the documents. What was I supposed to do?" "Let them take the damn papers. We could have made other copies." "We didn't have time for other copies. You know that." Rhett wanted to argue, wanted to make her understand that she was more important than any piece of paper, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I can't lose you," he said quietly. "You won't. You don't know that. Neither do you, so we do what we've been doing. We fight, we survive, we figure it out as we go." Rhett closed his eyes, holding her tight. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. The wind moved through the canyon, carrying the smell of sage and dust. "We should move soon," Elara said after a while, "before the heat gets too bad." Few more minutes. She didn't argue, just leaned into him, and they stood there together while the day climbed toward its peak. When they finally mounted up again, Rhett's body screamed in protest. The adrenaline from the fight was long gone, leaving behind a catalog of pains and injuries he couldn't afford to acknowledge. Elara looked just as rough, her face drawn, her movements careful. But they rode. What else could they do? The detour south added more than a day. The terrain was rougher, the trails less certain. They got lost twice, had to backtrack, lost precious hours. By the time they swung east toward Tucson, they were 3 days out from the courthouse in Prescott and running on fumes. On the fourth day, they saw smoke. It rose from the east, thick and black, too much to be a campfire or cooking fire. Rhett's stomach dropped. "Could be anything," Elara said, but her voice was thin. "Yeah." They rode toward it anyway, dread building with every mile. The smoke grew thicker, darker, and then they crested a rise and saw it. The Brennan Ranch was burning, not just the barn this time. The house, the outbuildings, everything. Flames leaped 50 feet into the air, consuming decades of work in minutes. Rhett kicked his horse into a gallop, Elara right behind him. They arrived to find Thomas Brennan in the yard, Margaret beside him, both of them watching their life burn. Brennan's face was stone, but Margaret was crying silent tears that cut Rhett deeper than any blade. Rhett dismounted, stumbling toward them. "What happened?" Brennan turned slowly. His eyes were hollow. "Crow's men. Came yesterday. Said we were harboring fugitives. Said they had orders to search the property. When I refused," he gestured at the inferno, "they torched it, all of it. Anyone hurt? We got out. That's all that matters." But his voice said otherwise. Everything mattered. Everything was gone. "I'm sorry," Rhett said, the words painfully inadequate. "This is my fault." "No." Brennan's voice was firm. "This is Crow's fault. Don't you dare take that on yourself." Elara moved to Margaret, wrapping an arm around the older woman's shoulders. Margaret collapsed against her, sobbing now, the sound raw and broken. "Where will you go?" Elara asked quietly. "My sister's in Tucson," Margaret managed. "We'll stay there. Try to rebuild, maybe. I don't know." "We're going to Tucson," Rhett said. "We'll take you." Brennan shook his head. "We've got a wagon, what's left of our things loaded. We'll manage. Thomas, you've got your own fight. Don't need us slowing you down." He met Rhett's eyes. "But you finish this, you hear me? You take that son of a bitch down, or so help me." "We will," Rhett promised, though he had no idea if he could keep it. They stayed until the fire burned itself out, until there was nothing left but ash and twisted metal and memories reduced to smoke. Then they mounted up and rode together toward Tucson, a small caravan of survivors heading toward an uncertain future. The road was long and hot. They stopped frequently for the Brennans, who were older and slower. It added time they didn't have, but Rhett wouldn't leave them behind. Wouldn't add abandonment to the list of sins Crow had already committed. At night they camped together. Margaret shared what food she'd salvaged. Brennan told stories about the ranch, about 30 years of work and love and stubborn determination. Elara listened quietly, her hand occasionally drifting to her stomach in a gesture Rhett was learning to recognize. On the second night out from the burned ranch, Brennan pulled Rhett aside. "She's pregnant," he said. It wasn't a question. Rhett nodded. "You planning to tell her to sit this out?" "Tried. Didn't work." Brennan almost smiled. "Figured. She's got fire in her. Rare thing, that kind of fire. Don't waste it." "I'm trying not to." "Good." Brennan clapped him on the shoulder. "Because you're going to need it. Both of you. What's coming next isn't going to be easy." "Nothing's been easy." "No. But this is different. You're about to poke a bear with federal authority behind you. Crow won't just fight back. He'll fight dirty. Dirtier than he has been." Rhett absorbed that. "You think we should back off?" "Hell no. I think you should go in with your eyes open and your powder dry. And I think you should be ready to finish it, whatever that takes." The words hung heavy in the night air. Rhett thought about what finishing it might mean, what he might have to do, what he might become. He'd killed men in the war, killed them up close, seen the light leave their eyes. He'd promised himself he'd never go back to that darkness. But looking at the ruins of Brennan's ranch, thinking about Alara and the child she carried, Rhett felt that old darkness stirring, not wanting it, but ready for it if necessary. "I'll do what needs doing," he said quietly. Brennan nodded, satisfied. "That's all any of us can do." They reached Tucson on the 6th day. The town was bigger than Prescott, sprawling and chaotic, full of miners and railroad workers, and the kind of desperate energy that came with frontier towns that were growing faster than they could handle. The federal marshal's office was a squat adobe building near the center of town, flying an American flag that hung limp in the still air. Rhett and Alara left the Brennans at Margaret's sister's house and rode straight there. Inside, a deputy sat at a desk, young and bored-looking. He glanced up as they entered. "Help you?" "We need to see the marshal," Rhett said. "It's urgent. Marshal's out on patrol. Won't be back for 3 days." Rhett's hands clenched. 3 days? "That's what I said. You want to leave a message?" "We sent a telegram last week about land fraud, forged documents. Did he get it?" The deputy shuffled through papers on his desk. "Yeah, here it is. Says he'd look into it when he got back." "When he got back?" Alara repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "We don't have 3 days." "Not my problem, ma'am. Marshal sets his own schedule." Rhett stepped forward, putting his hands on the desk and leaning in. "People are dying. Properties are being stolen through forged documents. We have proof. Certified proof from the Territorial Archives." The deputy didn't look impressed. "Then leave it with me. I'll make sure the marshal sees it." "No." Alara's voice cut through the room. "We're not leaving these documents with anyone. We'll wait for the marshal." "Suit yourself. But like I said, 3 days minimum." They left the office, frustration and fury radiating off both of them. Outside, the sun was merciless, the street choked with dust and noise. 3 days, Rhett said. "We've been gone almost a week already. No telling what's happened at the ranch. We can't go back without protection, without the law moving." "The law isn't moving. It's sitting on its ass in the desert somewhere." Alara paced, thinking. "There has to be another way. Someone else with authority." "Like who?" "A judge, a territorial governor, someone." Rhett wanted to believe it, but exhaustion and pain were making it hard to think clearly. His ribs still ached. His jaw was swollen. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest. "We find a place to stay," he said. "Clean up. Eat something that isn't trail rations. Think this through when we're not about to collapse." Alara looked ready to argue, then seemed to realize she was swaying on her feet. "All right, but just for tonight." They found a boarding house that was slightly less run down than the one in Prescott. The room had a real bed, a wash basin, and actual privacy. Rhett locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle. No more surprises. Alara sank onto the bed, pulling the documents from her pocket and smoothing them out on the quilt. They were worse for wear, stained, crumpled, torn at the edges, but still legible, still official. "All this," she said quietly. "All this running and fighting, and we're still no closer to stopping him." Rhett sat beside her, taking her hand. "We're closer than we were. We have proof. That's something. It's not enough. Maybe not, but it's what we've got." Alara leaned her head on his shoulder, exhaustion finally overwhelming defiance. "I'm so tired, Rhett." "I know. I don't know if I can keep doing this." "You can. You're the strongest person I've ever met." She laughed weakly. "That's a low bar." Still true. They sat in silence for a while, the noise from the street below filtering up through the thin walls. Somewhere nearby, a piano was playing badly. Someone was singing even worse. "What if we just disappear?" Alara said suddenly. "Take the horses, what money we have left, and just go. California, maybe. Oregon. Somewhere Crow can't reach." Rhett's chest tightened. "You don't mean that." "Don't I? We could start over, build something new, raise our child somewhere safe. Running isn't safe. Crow has reach, and even if we got far enough away that he couldn't touch us, we'd be looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives. As opposed to what we're doing now? Now we're fighting back. There's a difference. Alara pulled away to look at him. Is there? Or are we just too stubborn to know when we're beaten? Rhett cupped her face in his hands. We're not beaten. Bloodied, scared, running out of time, yes, but not beaten. Not while we're still breathing. You sound awfully certain for someone who doesn't know how this ends. I know how it ends. We win or we die trying, and I'd rather die fighting than live running. Alara's eyes filled with tears. Even if it means our child grows up without a father? The question hit him like a fist to the gut. Rhett closed his eyes, the weight of it crushing. I don't have a good answer for that, he admitted. All I know is that I can't raise a child in a world where men like Crow win. Can't teach them that the right thing to do is surrender when things get hard. So yeah, even knowing what I know, even terrified out of my mind, I'd still fight. I have to. Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then she kissed him, soft and fierce. When she pulled back, her expression had hardened into something like resolve. Then we fight, she said, but we fight smart. No more running headlong into danger, no more heroic stupidity. We plan, we prepare, and we make every move count. Agreed. And if at any point this goes sideways, if we're about to lose, we protect you and the baby first, always. I was going to say we go down swinging, but sure, your version works too. Despite everything, Rhett laughed. You're completely insane. Takes one to know one. They spent the rest of the evening planning. Alara laid out the documents on the bed, organizing them, cross-referencing dates and signatures. Rhett went out and bought a Tucson newspaper, scanning for any mention of land disputes or legal challenges to Crow's holdings. He found one, a small item buried on page 4. A rancher named Coleman had filed a lawsuit 3 months ago, challenging Crow's claim to water rights. The case was still pending. Coleman, Rhett said, showing Alara the article. If he's fighting Crow in court, he might be willing to join forces, pool our evidence. Or he might be too scared after seeing what happened to everyone else. Only one way to find out. They tracked down Coleman's address through the newspaper office. He lived on the outskirts of town, a modest spread that showed signs of struggle but also stubborn maintenance. They rode out the next morning. Coleman was a compact man in his 50s, weathered and wary. He answered the door with a shotgun in his hands and suspicion in his eyes. Help you? Name's Rhett Calder. This is my wife, Alara. We read about your lawsuit against Silas Crow. Coleman's expression darkened. What about it? We're fighting him too. We have evidence he's been forging documents. Thought maybe we could help each other. Coleman studied them for a long moment, then lowered the shotgun. Come inside. But if this is some kind of setup, you'll both regret it. Fair enough. Coleman's house was small but neat, everything in its place. He offered them coffee and sat across from them at a scarred wooden table. You said you have evidence, he prompted. Alara pulled out the documents, laying them carefully on the table. Coleman read them slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock to grim satisfaction. Son of a bitch, he breathed. You actually have proof, real proof. The originals are in the Territorial Archive in Prescott, Alara explained. These are certified copies. They show Crow's been using forged water rights treaties to claim access he doesn't legally have. Which invalidates every land deal he's made based on controlling that water, Coleman finished, including the one he's trying to force on me. Exactly. Coleman sat back, processing. This could work. My lawsuit is barely hanging on. Judge keeps delaying, finding reasons to push it back. But if I bring this in as evidence, if I can prove the whole foundation of Crow's claim is fraudulent, you win, Rhett said. And everyone else he's squeezed out has grounds to challenge their forced sales. It could bring down his whole empire, Alara added. Coleman's eyes sharpened with something like hope. When's your next court date? 2 weeks, but I can file an emergency motion, get it moved up. This is new evidence, material to the case. Judge would have to hear it. How fast can you move? Give me 2 days. I'll have the motion filed and a hearing scheduled. Coleman leaned forward. But you need to understand, the moment Crow finds out about this, he's going to come at us with everything he's got. Legal, illegal, doesn't matter. He'll burn the world down before he lets this evidence see a courtroom. He's already tried, Rhett said quietly. Burned our barn. Sent hired killers after us in Prescott. Torched our friend's ranch when they tried to help us. We know what we're up against. Coleman nodded slowly. Then you know we need protection. Real protection. Not just a filing and a prayer. The marshal's out on patrol, Ilara said. Won't be back for days. Then we go around him, territorial militia maybe. Or we make enough noise that someone with authority has to pay attention. How? Coleman smiled grimly. We take this to the newspapers. All of them. Tucson, Prescott, Phoenix if we can reach them. Make it public. Make it loud. Hard to disappear people when everyone's watching. It was risky. It would paint targets on all their backs, bigger and brighter than before. But it might also be exactly what they needed. Do it, Rhett said. Coleman stood, already moving. I'll start drafting the motion tonight. You get those documents to the newspapers tomorrow. Front page if possible. By the time Crow figures out what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it. They left Coleman's place as the sun was setting, the plan taking shape. It wasn't perfect. It probably wasn't even good. But it was action, momentum, a way forward when they'd been stuck. On the ride back to town, Ilara was quiet. Rhett glanced at her. Second thoughts? About 100, but we're committed now. We were committed the moment we found those documents. I suppose, she paused. Rhett, when this is over, when it's over, we rebuild. The ranch, our life, everything. We give our kid a place to grow up where the work is hard but honest, where people don't have to live in fear. You think that's possible? I think it has to be. Otherwise, what's the point? Ilara reached over and took his hand. They rode like that the rest of the way, connected, committed, facing whatever came next together. The next morning, they hit every newspaper office in Tucson. The editors were skeptical at first, another disgruntled rancher with grievances against a powerful man. But when they saw the certified documents, when they understood the scope of what Crow had been doing, the skepticism turned to something else. Interest, outrage, the scent of a real story. By noon, 3 papers had committed to running the story. By evening, telegraphs were flying to other territories, other cities. The news was spreading like wildfire. And somewhere, Silas Crow was finding out that his carefully constructed empire had just developed cracks. The newspapers hit the streets at dawn, and by mid-morning, Tucson was buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. Rhett and Ilara read the coverage in their boarding house room, the door locked and barricaded. The Tucson Gazette had gone biggest, running the story front page with the headline, Land Baron's Empire Built on Fraud. Exclusive documents reveal decade of deception. The other papers followed suit, each adding their own angles, their own outrage. Names were named, victims were listed, the forged documents were reproduced in careful detail, and Silas Crow's carefully maintained facade of respectability was crumbling in real time. It's working, Ilara said, scanning the articles. People are reading this, they're talking about it. Yeah, which means Crow knows about it too. Rhett moved to the window, checking the street below. He's going to retaliate, hard. Let him. The more he thrashes, the guiltier he looks. Ilara, he doesn't care how he looks anymore. He cares about survival, and cornered men do desperate things. As if summoning the very thing he feared, Rhett spotted 3 riders coming down the street, moving with purpose. Not Crow's usual hired muscle. These men wore badges. We've got company, he said. Ilara joined him at the window. Lawmen? Deputy marshals, looks like. Could be the real thing, could be Crow's people wearing tin stars. No way to know. They watched as the riders dismounted outside the boarding house. A moment later, heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs. A sharp knock rattled the door. Rhett Calder. Open up, federal business. Rhett and Ilara exchanged glances. He grabbed his rifle, she slipped the documents into her dress pocket. Together, they approached the door. Who's asking? Rhett called through the wood. Deputy Marshal William Frost, out of the Tucson office. We need to talk about the articles in this morning's papers. How do I know you're really federal? A pause. Then a badge slid under the door. Genuine silver, proper seals, nothing cheap or fake about it. Rhett picked it up, examined it, then slowly removed the barricade and opened the door. 3 men stood in the hallway. The one in front was older, 50s maybe, with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. The badge on his chest matched the one he'd slid under the door. The 2 behind him were younger, harder, hands resting casually near their sidearms. "Marshal Frost," Rhett said, handing back the badge. "Mr. Calder. Mrs. Calder." Frost tipped his hat to Alara. "Mind if we come in?" "Depends on why you're here." "To talk about Silas Crow, and to keep you both alive long enough to testify against him." That got their attention. Rhett stepped aside, letting the marshals in. They filled the small room with their presence, making it feel suddenly cramped. Frost got straight to business. "I've been tracking Crow for 2 years. Land fraud, intimidation, suspected arson, possibly worse. But he's careful, covers his tracks, keeps his hands clean. Until now." He pulled a folded newspaper from his coat. "This changes everything." "You believe us then," Alara said. "I believe the documents. I sent a man to Prescott yesterday to verify them with the Territorial Archives. Telegraph came back an hour ago. They're legitimate, which means Crow's entire water rights claim is fraudulent, which means every acquisition he's made based on those rights is potentially voidable." "Potentially?" Rhett asked. "We still need to prove it in court. Need witnesses, chain of custody for the documents, expert testimony. It's going to be messy and complicated, but it's winnable, especially now that it's public." "What about protection?" Alara asked. "Crow's already tried to kill us once, burned out our allies. He's not going to stop just because some newspapers are printing stories." Frost nodded grimly. "Which is why you're both coming into protective custody. We've got a safe house outside town. You'll stay there until the hearing." "When's the hearing?" "Judge moved it up to 4 days from now, given the public interest. Coleman's emergency motion got approved this morning. Crow's lawyers are screaming about it, but the judge is standing firm." 4 days. 96 hours between them and the potential end of this nightmare. Rhett wanted to feel relief, but all he felt was dread. 4 days was an eternity when someone wanted you dead. "What about our ranch?" he asked. "We've been gone over a week, could be ashes by now." "I sent 2 men out there yesterday. Place is still standing. Some damage. Looks like someone tried to burn the house, but it didn't take. Your neighbor Brennan left a note saying he did what he could before his own place went up." Rhett's chest tightened. The ranch was standing. Against all odds, it was still there. "We need to go back," Alara said. "Make sure it's secure, salvage what we can—" "Negative," Frost cut her off. "Too dangerous. Crow's got men watching the property. You show up, you're walking into an ambush." "Then what? We just abandon it?" "You let my men handle security. Once this hearing is done and Crow's in custody, you can go home. Not before." It made sense. It was the smart play. But leaving the ranch in someone else's hands felt like abandoning a child. Rhett looked at Alara. She was chewing her lip the way she did when she was wrestling with something. Finally, she nodded. "All right, we do it your way. But the moment that hearing's over, you'll be escorted home with a full security detail," Frost promised. "You have my word." They packed what little they had and followed the marshals out to waiting horses. The ride to the safe house took an hour, heading west into rougher country. The house itself was more of a fortified cabin, set in a box canyon with only one way in or out. Defensible, isolated, safe, hopefully. They spent the next 3 days in a kind of limbo. The marshals rotated watches, 2 always on duty, rifles ready. Frost came and went, bringing updates, preparing them for what testimony would look like, drilling them on details until Rhett wanted to scream. Alara handled it better, her mind sharp and focused, asking questions Rhett hadn't even thought of. But at night, when they were alone in the small back room, she let the mask slip. Her hands would shake, her breathing would go shallow. Rhett would hold her, whispering reassurances he only half believed. "It's almost over," he'd say. "Or just beginning," she'd reply. On the 3rd night, Frost brought news that changed everything. "Crow's making a move, he's seen," he said, bursting into the cabin with 2 of his men. "Got word from town. He's liquidating assets, moving money, preparing to run." Rhett stood from the table. "When?" "Soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. He knows the hearing's going to bury him, so he's cutting his losses and disappearing." "Can you stop him?" We've got men watching the main roads, the rail station, anywhere he might run. But Crow's slippery. If he's got an escape route we don't know about." Frost trailed off, the implication clear. "He gets away," Alara finished. "Not if we move fast. I'm pulling security from here. Everyone to town. We lock down every exit, force him to show himself." "What about us?" Rhett asked. "You stay put. Door locked, rifles loaded. Anyone comes who isn't wearing a badge, you shoot first and apologize later." It was far from ideal, but they didn't have better options. Frost and his men rode out 20 minutes later, leaving Rhett and Alara alone in the darkening canyon. The silence that followed was oppressive. Rhett checked the rifles, counted ammunition, barricaded the door. Alara sat at the table, the documents spread in front of her, reading them again like they might contain answers she'd missed. "You should rest," Rhett said. "Can't. Too wired." "Alara, I keep thinking about what happens if he runs, if he disappears and we never get justice. All of this, all the fighting and running and people getting hurt, it'll be for nothing." "It won't be for nothing. The truth is out there now. The newspapers, the public record. Even if Crow runs, his empire's finished. But he'll be free, somewhere warm, spending money he stole, living the good life while we scrape by trying to rebuild. That's not justice." Rhett had no answer for that, because she was right. The law moved slow, and rich men had a way of slipping through its fingers. They'd exposed Crow, maybe even destroyed his power base, but that didn't guarantee he'd pay for what he'd done. "I need air," Alara said, standing abruptly. "You're not going outside." "Just the porch. I'll stay close." Rhett wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She needed space, needed to breathe. He followed her out, staying just inside the doorway while she stood at the porch edge, looking up at the stars. They were thick and bright, the kind of sky you only got far from civilization, beautiful in a way that felt almost mocking. "You ever think about what comes after?" Alara asked quietly. "After what? After all of this? After Crow's done? After the ranch is rebuilt? After the baby comes? What does life look like then?" Rhett stepped beside her. "Honestly, I try not to think that far ahead. Feels like tempting fate. I think about it constantly, whether our child will grow up safe, whether we'll be able to give them something better than what we had. We will. How do you know? Because we'll work ourselves half to death making it happen. Because we're too stubborn to accept anything less. And because," he took her hand, "because they'll have you as a mother. And that's worth more than any land or money or empire." Alara's eyes shimmered in the starlight. "You always know what to say?" "Not always. Just when it matters." She leaned into him, and they stood there together, stealing a moment of peace in the midst of chaos. But peace was a luxury they couldn't afford for long. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet. Rhett grabbed Alara and pulled her inside, slamming the door and dropping the bar. He grabbed his rifle, moving to the window. Outside, shadows moved in the darkness. Multiple riders coming up the canyon approach. "How many?" Alara whispered, her own rifle in hand. 6. Maybe 8. Could be the marshals coming back. Or it's Crow's men who figured out where we are. Rhett cursed under his breath. The riders were getting closer, moving with the kind of caution that spoke of hostile intent. Not marshals, not friends. "Back room," he said. "Bar the door. Don't come out unless I call for you." "Rhett, go. Please." Alara hesitated, then did as he asked, disappearing into the back. Rhett heard the scrape of furniture being moved, the door being reinforced. Good. At least she'd have a chance if this went bad. The riders stopped just outside rifle range. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a voice called out, familiar and hateful. "Calder, I know you're in there." Silas Crow. The man himself, not hiding behind hired guns for once. Rhett didn't answer, just sighted down his rifle barrel, tracking movement in the darkness. "I'm offering you a deal," Crow continued. "One last chance. Give me those documents, get on your horse, and ride away. I'll let you live. Hell, I'll even pay you for your trouble. $10,000. More money than you'd see in 10 years of ranching." It was a lie. Had to be. Crow didn't make deals, didn't let witnesses walk away, But the man sounded desperate, and desperate men sometimes told the truth. Not interested, Rhett called back. Then you're signing your death warrant. Mine too, probably, but I'm not going down alone. You already lost, Crow. The whole territory knows what you did. Running won't change that. Maybe not, but it'll give me time to disappear properly. You, on the other hand, you've got nowhere to run. No marshals coming to save you, just you, your wife, and my men. How long you think you can hold out? Rhett's finger tightened on the trigger. One shot. He could end this now, put a bullet in Crow and finish it. But that would make him a murderer, would throw away everything they'd fought for. The law had to win this. Had to. Last chance, Calder. I'm counting to 10. Then my men burn that cabin to the ground with you inside. Do your worst, Rhett said. Crow laughed, bitter and sharp. So be it. 1, 2. Rhett braced himself, ready for the rush, ready for fire and bullets, ready to die if that's what it took. But before Crow reached 10, new sounds echoed through the canyon. More horses. A lot of them. Coming fast. And then the darkness erupted with gunfire. Not aimed at the cabin, aimed at Crow's men. The marshals had returned, and they'd brought reinforcements. Muzzle flashes lit the night like lightning. Men shouted, horses screamed. Crow's voice rang out, ordering retreat, but it was chaos, panic, a rout. Rhett stayed low, watching through the window as the battle played out. It was short and brutal. Crow's men broke and ran, those who could. The ones who couldn't surrendered, hands up, weapons thrown down. And through it all, Silas Crow tried to escape, spurring his horse toward the canyon entrance. Marshal Frost cut him off, rifle raised. It's over, Crow, get down! For a heartbeat, Rhett thought the man might do something stupid, might draw on the marshal, go out in a blaze of defiance. But Crow wasn't that brave. He was a coward who'd built power by standing on other people's backs, and when faced with real consequences, he folded. He dismounted slowly, hands raised, defeat written across his face. Frost's men moved in, shackling Crow and his surviving crew. Rhett finally lowered his rifle, his hand shaking with adrenaline crash. He turned to find Alara standing in the doorway of the back room, her face pale but composed. Is it done? She asked. Yeah, it's done. She crossed to him and they held each other while outside the marshals cleaned up the wreckage. It was over. Actually, finally over. Or so they thought. The hearing happened 2 days later in a packed Tucson courtroom. Every seat was filled, people standing in the aisles, overflow crowds gathering in the street outside. The newspapers had done their work. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a reckoning. Crow sat at the defense table, shackled, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. His lawyers, 3 of them, imported from back east, looked uncomfortable and outmatched. Across the aisle, Coleman sat with a younger attorney, confident and prepared. Rhett and Alara were in the front row, hands clasped together, watching history unfold. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision. The forged documents, the pattern of fraud, the victims whose lives had been destroyed. Witnesses testified. Brennan, his voice steady despite his losses. Mary Dutton from the county office, risking her job to tell the truth. Coleman himself, explaining how he'd discovered the discrepancies, how he'd refused to back down. And then it was Rhett's turn. He walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like water, raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor guided him through the story, the foreclosure notice, the desperate ride to Prescott, finding the proof in the territorial archives. Rhett spoke plainly, without embellishment, just facts and truth. Crow's lawyers tried to rattle him on cross-examination, suggesting he'd fabricated evidence, that he was a disgruntled debtor looking for revenge. But Rhett had lived through war and loss and years of grinding poverty. Some fancy lawyer wasn't going to shake him. When Alara took the stand, she was magnificent, sharp, clear, unshakable. She walked the court through every detail, produced the certified documents like a prosecutor herself. The defense tried to attack her credibility, suggested she was an opportunist who'd married Rhett for his land. Alara's response was calm and devastating. I married a man with a failing ranch, crushing debt, and enemies powerful enough to destroy us both. If I was an opportunist, I'm terrible at it. The courtroom laughed. Even the judge cracked a smile. The trial lasted 3 days. 3 days of testimony, evidence, legal arguments that went over Rhett's head. But the outcome was never really in doubt. The evidence was too solid, the fraud too blatant. Crowe had built his empire on lies, and lies couldn't withstand the weight of truth. When the judge delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted. Cheering, crying, chaos. Crowe sat motionless, his face gray, his empire ashes. The judge sentenced him on the spot. 20 years in territorial prison for fraud. Additional charges pending for arson, attempted murder, conspiracy. Crowe would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Outside the courthouse, Rhett and Alara stood on the steps, surrounded by well-wishers and reporters. Flashbulbs popped. Questions flew. But Rhett only had eyes for Alara, who was crying and laughing at the same time. "We did it," she said. "We did it," he agreed. Coleman pushed through the crowd, pumping Rhett's hand enthusiastically. "You saved us all. You know that? Every family he destroyed has a chance now. To get their land back, to rebuild, because you refused to quit." "We refused to quit," Rhett corrected, pulling Alara close. They stayed in Tucson another week, helping families file claims to reclaim their properties, helping Coleman coordinate the legal challenges that would untangle Crowe's web of fraud. It was tedious work, boring work, but necessary, the kind of work that actually changed things. And then, finally, they went home. The ranch looked different in the morning light, smaller maybe, more worn, but it was theirs, and it was standing, and that was enough. They dismounted in the yard, surveying the damage. The barn was still gone, just a blackened foundation. The house had scorch marks where someone had tried and failed to set it alight. Fences were down. The well needed work. But it was fixable. All of it. "Where do we start?" Alara asked. Rhett looked around, mentally cataloging the work ahead. Months of it. Maybe years. Then he looked at Alara, strong, stubborn, carrying their child, and smiled. "We start by not doing it alone this time." Within a month, help arrived. Brennan and Margaret came first, ready to rebuild what they'd lost. Then other families Crowe had displaced, drawn by news that land claims were being honored, that there was a place where justice had actually won. They brought skills, tools, hope. The community grew, barn raisings, shared harvests, neighbors helping neighbors. It was slow, hard work. Nothing came easy. But it came honestly, and that made all the difference. Alara's pregnancy progressed. By fall, she was showing. Her movement slower but no less determined. She still worked the ranch, still pushed herself, until Rhett and Margaret joined forces to make her rest. "You're impossible," Rhett told her one evening as she fought to help repair a fence despite being 7 months pregnant. "You've mentioned that," she replied. "I mean it. Sit down before you hurt yourself." "I'm pregnant, not broken." "You're about to be both if you don't stop climbing on things." She glared at him, but there was affection in it. Love, even. The kind that came from fighting battles together and coming out the other side still standing. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled high, isolating the ranch for weeks at a time, but they'd prepared, stocked supplies, reinforced the house. They sat by the fire on long nights, Alara reading while Rhett carved a cradle from salvaged wood. The baby came in early spring during a rainstorm that turned the world to mud. Margaret and a midwife from town helped deliver while Rhett paced the front room, useless and terrified. When he finally heard the cry, sharp and strong and absolutely perfect, he nearly collapsed with relief. They named her Rose. Simple, sturdy, beautiful without being fragile. She had Alara's dark hair and Rhett's stubborn jaw, and when she wrapped her tiny hand around his finger, Rhett felt something inside him that had been broken for years finally click back into place. "She's perfect," Alara whispered, exhausted and radiant. "She's ours," Rhett said. "That's all that matters." The ranch thrived. Slowly, painstakingly, it became what Rhett had always envisioned. Not grand, not wealthy, but honest. A place where work had meaning, where people could build something lasting. New families settled nearby, forming a community that watched each other's backs, that shared burdens and celebrated victories. Coleman visited sometimes, bringing news from town, legal updates on the continuing prosecution of Crowe's associates. The man's empire had completely collapsed. Dozens of families had reclaimed their land. The whole economic structure of the region was reorganizing around something fairer, more sustainable. You started this, Coleman told Rhett one evening. You and Alara. You could have run, could have given up, but you stood and fought, and it changed everything. Rhett thought about that later, watching Alara rock Rose to sleep, the lamplight soft on both their faces. Had they really changed anything? Or had they just survived and the change happened around them? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe survival was change. Maybe refusing to bend, refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. Maybe that was revolution enough. Years passed. Rose grew into a wild, fearless child who climbed everything and questioned everything and drove both her parents to exhaustion and joy in equal measure. More children followed, a boy they named Samuel, another girl they called Grace. The house expanded to hold them all. Rooms added as needed, nothing fancy but enough. Rhett's hair went gray at the temples. Alara's hands grew rough from work, laugh lines deepening around her eyes. They fought sometimes, argued over money and choices and how to raise their children, but they never stopped fighting together, for each other, building something that would outlast them both. The ranch became known throughout the territory, not for size or wealth, but for something harder to quantify. Integrity, maybe. The Calder place, where people came when they needed help, where a handshake meant something, where the work was hard but the treatment was fair. On Rose's 10th birthday, Rhett stood on the porch at sunset, watching his children play in the yard while Alara prepared dinner inside. The barn had been rebuilt years ago, better than before. The fences stood straight and strong. The land produced steady yields, nothing spectacular but enough to live on, enough to be proud of. Alara joined him, wiping flour from her hands. What are you thinking about? About that day you stepped off the stagecoach. How sure I was that you'd be gone in a week. She laughed. I almost was. You were awful. So were you. I was perfect. You were just too stubborn to see it. Yeah, lucky for us, I stayed stubborn. Alara leaned against him, and they watched their children together. Rose was organizing some game, bossing her siblings around with the kind of confidence that came from being loved unconditionally. Samuel was arguing back, testing boundaries. Grace was ignoring them both, focused on a bug she'd found. You think they'll understand someday? Alara asked quietly. What it costs to give them this? Maybe. Maybe not. But they'll have it regardless. That's what matters. Is it enough? Everything we went through, everything we lost, was it worth it? Rhett thought about that. About the fear, the violence, the nights when survival seemed impossible. About Brennan's ranch burning, about running for their lives, about facing down men with guns and lawyers with briefcases. About all of it. Then he looked at his children, at his wife, at the life they'd carved from dust and determination. Yeah, he said, it was worth it. And he meant it. Not because the outcome was perfect. It wasn't. Not because they'd fixed everything or saved everyone. They hadn't. But because they'd refused to accept that might made right, that power could simply take what it wanted without consequence. They'd stood up when standing up seemed impossible. They'd fought back when everyone said fighting was pointless. And they'd won. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but completely. They'd taken everything Crow threw at them and survived it. And in surviving, they'd proven something important. That ordinary people could fight powerful ones. That truth eventually outweighed lies. That courage mattered, even when you were scared. Especially when you were scared. These were lessons their children would need someday. Lessons about standing up to bullies, about fighting for what's right, even when the cost is high, about the difference between surviving and living. Rhett and Alara would teach them, through stories and example, through the very existence of the ranch they'd saved. But for now, in this moment, the lessons could wait. For now, there was just a family standing on a porch as the sun set over land they'd earned the hard way. Land that would be there for their children and their children's children, built on a foundation not of fraud or force, but of simple, stubborn refusal to surrender. Dinner was ready. The children needed to be called in, washed up, fed. Life continued, prosaic and precious. But as Rhett followed Alara inside, as Rose ran past him laughing, as Samuel and Grace fought over who got to sit where, he felt something he'd stopped feeling years ago, back before the war, before Caroline, before all the losses that had hardened him into someone who'd forgotten how. Gratitude. Pure and simple. For the life he had, for the woman who'd forced her way into it, for the children that life had created, for second chances and unlikely victories, and the stubborn refusal to give up that had made all of it possible. "Dad," Rose called. "Come on, Mama made pie." Rhett smiled and went inside, closing the door on the gathering darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new problems to solve. That was the nature of life on the frontier, the price of building something real. But tonight, they had pie. They had each other. They had home. And that was enough. That was everything.